So Ursula deep dive. So we're gonna do this in a three-way. Myself, Zach, and Empro. I think the first way I want to start this off is just a quick little statement of what we think of the character overall, kind of like how she plays, and then we'll kind of start jumping into, like we've always done these deep dives, talk about the villain deck a little bit, and then we'll jump into how to fate Ursula. It's kind of interesting because I honestly think talking about both decks at the same time is actually very viable to this conversation. Um, I think I think the best way to describe Ursula is that she is one of the most one of the most versatile characters in the game for her play style. Because her play style is very unique because she does not do things normally different. She has probably the strongest tool set of all the characters, but the tool set is very reactionary and you have to play her very patiently. She is very much unlike a lot of other characters we've been talking about where you can play them a little bit more, aggressively. She is very much a passive character where she's just kind of like a ticking time bomb ready to go off when she's ready to go. But that could be sped up or slowed down depending on how she's played. So that's kind of how I view Ursula. Zach, what are your thoughts on the character?
Well, to state the other obvious, she also is the only character that only has access to 3 locations at all times.
Yeah.
Other villains have locked location. Ursula, on the other hand, has a permanent locked location. Granted, she can move her lock, which we will, of course, get into shortly. But whether her lock is on one location or the other, she only has access to 3 spots no matter what. And of course, if heroes are on the board, that limits your action economy even more. So she is a strangely limited character.
And that's why she needs to use her tools at her disposal to make the most of her action economy that she can while she's in the middle of this lock.
Precisely.
Yeah, that was a great pun. So I guess we'll go ahead and kind of just start talking about a little bit of how she kind of works. I'm assuming you've never played Ursula. So the way that Ursula works is that her goal is that she needs to have these two unique items at the start of her turn at Ursula's lair. They are both the crown, and they are both the trident. I almost said my English wrong there. So the crown and the trident are both 4 costs, so they're quite expensive. There's not a lot of other 4 cost type of items in the game like this. One of the only other ones that come to the top of my head are cards like Take a Shot, as well as Hook's Map. These 2 cards right here are quite expensive. Now, on top of that, the crown, when it's played, can be just immediately be played to Ursula's lair, assuming that it's not locked, which we will also get to. We'll talk more about the ability on the crown later, but just a general idea. The Trident's a little bit of a different case, because the idea behind the Trident is that when it is played, it actually summons our friend King Triton, and it gets attached to him. So when you play it, you basically immediately summon a hero out onto the board, and you can play the Trident wherever. So if you want to play it to the shore, you can do that. You can play it to Ursula's lair if you so desire. Do the same. You can play that anywhere. But the idea is that you have to defeat King Triton to get the Trident back under your control. And then wherever he's defeated, that's where it gets left off. And then if it's not at Ursula's lair, you will need to move it to Ursula's lair and then start your turn there to win. It's also kind of weird, and we'll get into this, that really once Ursula's items are at the lair, there is really only one card that can stop her. Really only one card, which is Ariel. But we'll kind of get more into that in detail as we kind of go about. So, any other notes I should kind of add on top of that?
I mean, her objective is about as straightforward as they come. You just play 2 items and defeat 1 hero, and that's it. So it's kind of like Hades. Like Hades' objective, just play 3 Titans and move them over to the end of your board. Seems straightforward, but once you get into how you are able to achieve that objective, there are many complications that can get into your way. That's what we're going to help you do in this deep dive, is avoid those complications. So the simple objective can actually be simple for you to achieve and hopefully win more often with the Sea Witch.
I agree. Emperor, would you like to add anything to that as well?
I think you guys just about covered it. Yeah, you just have to get the 2 items out, vanquish King Triton, and avoid the heroes or effects that may come up in your way.
All right. All right, so let's kind of go ahead and get into the weird gimmicky stuff with Ursula. So there's kind of really two major things that are very unique to this character. Obviously, we've already covered one of them. Her main gimmick, one of her main gimmicks, is the fact that one of the common mechanics that are in the game is that there is a lock token that will lock up a location. So essentially, the both players, fading and not fading, will not be able to interact with that location. Ursula at all times will only have access to three locations. So how that works is that there's a card called Change Form, and when Change Form is played, it allows you to move the lock token around. So you can move it back and forth like so. There is also a fake card that Empro is pulling out for us that actually does the same thing. It's Grimsby. It's a hero. When he is played, you may also do the same thing. Reason being, and we could probably go ahead and get into this a little bit with this mechanic, which we'll get to. The Palace has some pretty desirable actions that Ursula might need, but the catch is the fact that since Ursula's lair is now locked, you cannot move nor play the crown or the trident to Ursula's lair because of that. So the idea is you need to either sacrifice your ability to progress towards your goal to play your items there to gain a lot of great utility, or you can keep this open, sacrifice the utility, get a little minor setback on the utility, but be able to still play cards here towards your objective, which is also still very important. Now, the reason why that utility spot is great is because of this mechanic. So, unlike other characters, Ursula does not defeat characters with a typical vanquish action. What happens is that, let's say we're going to bring out our boy Doggy Dog Max to Eric's ship. What you will need to do is you will need to play a contract to said hero that does not say, it will tell you you cannot play this contract to a character at that particular location. But then you have to move this character to the location it specifies, so in this case, Ursula's lair, to defeat them. So unlike using allies with a vanquish action with a strength greater or equal to or greater than, you actually just have to straightforward just move them to the location that the binding contract specifies, and that's how you defeat. And that's kind of the gist. So I'll let Zach and Empro kind of take over this conversation a little bit. Let's talk about the binding contracts, the whole concept here. I know we're probably going to dive into some other cards here, but kind of what are your thoughts? Empro, let's start with you. What are your thoughts on the whole binding contracts? What are some tips and tricks you would talk about with these?
So one of the great things about the binding contracts is that you aren't limited to just one either. Say that Max is at Eric's ship, you can play both a lair contract and a shore contract to the same character. You'll have the versatility to vanquish him at either location. As well, where was I going with this? There are also a lot of movement tools to get these heroes vanquished, such as Poor Unfortunate Souls, Whirlpool, 2 eels, and the move hero action at the palace. But as well, there are also 2 sets of contracts for the middle locations. So whichever location that your lock token is at, you'll be able to vanquish at either location. So you have more versatility there. As well, if you do have a hero at a location with that same binding contract, you cannot play that binding contract on that hero.
Correct.
You would have to play, say, a shore contract or the palace contract in order to vanquish that hero.
Yeah, that's a great point. One of the biggest things I've learned when playing Ursula recently is that I think one of the things that people forget is that you can play 2 contracts onto somebody. And one of the things we'll get into is Ursula's power management a little bit. Even though that's expensive, sometimes just getting rid of the card out of your hand and putting that onto the hero is not a bad idea. So that way, when you have the time to defeat them, you can kind of pick and choose where you want to put them rather than be forced to only focus on one direct path. When you put yourself down more of a single line, it makes it a little bit more difficult to work with. But if you're willing to put 2 contracts onto the character, not only are you getting rid of cards in your hand, but you're also opening up other opportunities to defeat them at different locations. So that's definitely something I would not be opposed to doing at all because I've done it before. And there's other reasons to do that um, with a particular card, which we will talk more about later. But I completely agree with your statement. Zach, do you have anything to add with the binding contracts?
Yeah, I will say Ursula's vanquish mechanism is very untypical. And Ursula and Evil Queen are the only two that have just straight up no vanquish action on their realm. They both require 2 steps to vanquish a hero. Evil Queen, of course, has to get rid of convert. I'm hearing some echo
Are we
on
hearing
the
echo?
stream.
Are
Yeah,
you
there's
good?
a little bit of an echo.
Is it on my end?
All right.
Do I need to slow it down?
Nope.
All right.
Okay,
never mind.
I'm good
We
now.
peachy. We peachy.
All right, there we go. Peachy good. That was just a weird
Peachy.
echo
Disney
of the
Villainous,
bottom of the
everybody. We're not
sleeve.
even playing a game.
Disney Villainous. But yes, so with Evil Queen, she has 2 steps she has to take. She has to brew the poison, and then she has to pay that cost. Ursula, however, doesn't have to deal with the cost as she vanquishes. So somebody like Ariel, who's 4 strength, somebody like Flounder, that's 1 strength, the strength really doesn't matter to Ariel. She is going to have to spend a minimum of 2 power, which is how much the binding contracts cost, if she's able to use the move action at the palace. Otherwise, it would typically be 3. Use an effect to be able to move it as well. There are things we'll talk about later, such as King Trident, who makes those contracts and effects more expensive, Snarfblats, which can make those contracts more expensive on any hero. But in general, Ursula is only going to have to spend 2 to 3 power to vanquish a hero, regardless of their strength requirement. So that is something to keep in mind, that as you think about vanquishing heroes, unlike any other villain, you don't have to worry about how strong or weak are they. You just worry about, do I have a contract? Can I move them? And it's as simple as that.
I would one thing I will add is that Zach is absolutely right. The strength of the heroes and for Ursula specifically does not matter. But one thing you will need to keep in mind, one thing that the designers did keep intact with these characters is that their strengths are usually relative to obviously the character themselves and how important they are to the movie, but also like how powerful their effect is at certain points. And what that means is that if you really want to get rid of one of these guys, you will need to watch out for some of the conditions that pop off when a hero of a certain strength is defeated. So stuff like ferocity, obsession, malice, things like that. You will need to keep in mind that when you're playing against those particular villains, because those conditions will pop against defeating those characters. And one thing I'll actually jump into with this conversation with the defeating is that the way that what makes Ursula very interesting and is what made this conversation about her so intriguing to talk about is that her playstyle is very controlling and patient. As the Popo are driving by me, about to arrest me for talking about Ursula. They're coming. They're coming for me, everybody. The reason being is that since Ursula is always limited to only 3 locations in her realm, it's going to be very easy for, after basically only 2 fate actions, to immediately have your locations covered up pretty heavily. And like Zach was talking about, it essentially, at the very most, for most of the time, is going to cost you 3 power just to defeat a particular character. Usually, it could be cheaper depending on what tools you have, but you're immediately blocking a lot of your action economy. And that's what makes her a little bit more difficult to work with. But the thing is that with Ursula in particular, the way I like to play her, and this is where we can start kind of diving into this 3-way conversation, is I like to play her very patiently. I like to go around, scurry up some power, keep that in the back for myself to play my items, but also have enough power to make sure I defeat my heroes. Because one of the major things that will happen is, and it doesn't matter even in the early game what heroes are really being played, except for maybe Flounder, which we'll get to. These folks are really just blocking actions that Ursula needs to start progressing forward. And if you block those, Ursula's going to have a really hard time trying to actually make a lot of progress towards her goal. If you aren't trying to actively defeat those heroes in the early game, I will say, because that's going to get to the second part of my point, that's going to really slow you down. And that's when Ursula gets put into a crawl, basically, where if she's not effectively, taking care of things, essentially she's going to be forced into a single-minded plan and eventually might get into a weird fate lock, which we'll talk about later. Now, when it comes to the late game, what makes Ursula also interesting is the fact that once she kind of has a lot of the tools ready to go, if heroes start getting played, when she's already got both the items out, she can kind of just coast. You don't necessarily need to worry about vanquishing at that point. The term hero stacking then comes into play where if you do need to spare up some locations, use your different tools to move them around and put them outside of harm's way. Because at one point you are going to run out of heroes to play from the opponent for them to actually do anything effective. But that's when I would say the hero stacking concept is the best. But really, that's what makes Ursula so interesting is that she has this vanquish tool, and in the early game, it's very strong. But in the later game, you don't want to be spending all that power on trying to take these guys out, maybe except for King Trident. You want to try to save that power to play your items and have the tools to kind of mitigate that stuff around so you can make sure you're ready to win. So that's my 2 cents about the vanquishing.
Another thought to add on vanquishing heroes early game is that while you are setting up for a kill, you can actually play the third special item of Ursula's, the Cauldron, and activate it to gain power if you're currently struggling to amass power. Not only can you activate the Cauldron and gain 2 power from just having a contract out on the board and ready to kill, you're able to then, say, spend 1 and move that hero to that location and vanquish them. And you're netting more power than you would have without that Cauldron, without being set up to kill. And so that's just kind of another reason why setting up for vanquishing or even just planning ahead with binding contracts is so important for Ursula. You need to be playing the long game when it comes to some of these characters and vanquishing, but also using your tools to make more progress in that sense.
That is a great point, my friend. Long game is a great point because someone in chat actually talks about when you say play patiently, do you mean slowly or calmly? Me, and now granted, this might be different for you too, but patiently for me is more of you're just kind of building up. You are ramping up your game so that way when you're ready to pounce, you have all the tools to go ahead and just kind of pounce. Because one thing I noticed is that when you have a ton of power, and you have the stuff that you need to start making progress, you can blow away some power, play one of your key items, and then, play some contracts to kill some heroes and just don't care. That's what I kind of mean by playing patiently. Because just like what Emperor was talking about, when you want to play that longer game, stuff like the Cauldron does start becoming more effective. Because one of the things I am not the best at is using the Cauldron in effective times, because the Cauldron's a unique item. There's only one copy of it. But if you do get the chance, like Emperor was saying, definitely try to use it to net back that power. Because there's no point of just, not being able to gain that power back if you're playing a slower game. Especially if the opponent isn't fading you as aggressively. If you want to maybe wait to defeat somebody, place a contract on them, and then activate the Cauldron to basically gain that power back, it's probably worth it in the long run. Especially if you got someone with 2 contracts on them. You instantly gain a lot more power, which is great.
Yep. And I will say that Ursula is strange in the sense that if she were to have a perfect game and only play the cards she needs, the crown, the trident, and a contract to defeat King Trident, you're still needing to spend a absolute minimum of 11 power without playing any other cards. Granted, if you're still going to play your effects, if you're going to play your eels,
you need a way to
snarf flat, but at an absolute minimum, you're going to have to spend 11 power. So that power actually becomes important. As much as it doesn't seem like that's imperative to her gameplay, if she wants to move and if she wants to move fast, she's going to find a way to need to get that power. And that Cauldron is one way to do it.
Exactly. Now, another way, and we can kind of go ahead and start diving into her effects here. So most of Ursula's cards are mainly effects. There are some items, there are some allies, which we'll get to, but it's mainly effects. And a lot of these effects kind of help work around her game plan of this kind of weird, patient, trying to gain a bunch of power to effectively just kind of, spend it all, use what you need to do to get the job done. Wrong character, but, I digress. And, try to win the game. And one of those ways to gain power really efficiently that I found is Grow Giant. So what Grow Giant allows you to do is that since Ursula has an issue with action economy, is that you can play Grow Giant to take an action at an adjacent location. Even if it's a fate action, and that action can be at a location that is locked. So, perfect example, you're at the shore, you have a hero, let's just pretend it's Ariel. She's got this binding contract, all that stuff. I don't have any whirlpools, I don't have any eels, I don't have poor unfortunate souls, but I do have Grow Giant. If I play Grow Giant, I can take the move hero action and then move Ariel over that way. The main tool I like to use it for, though, specifically, is that when I'm at Eric's ship, if I gain one, I'm essentially spending one to play Grow Giant to gain three. So that is one way that I've learned to gain a lot of power very effectively. That is my favorite place to do it. I do sometimes in pinches, I go to the shore and then I'll spend basically one to gain two because you can do it at the palace. Well, this is one way I found to actually start stockpiling a lot of the power on Ursula, is the fact that Grow Giant allows you to take those actions. As well as sometimes with your card management, if you're really trying to dig for one of these key items like the Trident and the Crown, but you already have a copy of Whirlpool in hand and you already plan on going to the shore, you may as well discard a copy of Whirlpool knowing you have more copies of it, and you can just go use that action instead to move the hero to an adjacent location, if so desired. That might not always be what you want to do, but just that versatility of this card is absolutely great. And I'm just talking only about move hero and gaining power. I've seen it by a few different players where they've used Grow Giant to take the activate action, which I thought was pretty smart, where you're actually doing stuff like
a lot of
Cauldron. Yeah.
Say that you're setting up a lot of vanquishes here, like you've got a lot of people here, and you've got, say, a palace contract and not the shore contract. You can't play those on them, but 2 ship contracts. And you go here, and otherwise you can't use the Cauldron. You play Grow Giant, you gain 6 power.
It's a lot of money.
Actually, you spend one, but yeah.
I spend one to gain 6.
Something I will point out, which is important to know, is that if the crown or the cauldron is in the lair and it's locked, it's no longer able to be activated.
Correct.
Items that are locked in the lair are unable to be interacted with. Even though Grow Giant can take that action at the locked location, these items can't be used. So obviously the crown you're going to want here, but if you have the cauldron, make sure you're not playing it to the lair. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to use it.
Don't play the Cauldron to the lair.
Yeah, don't do it. It seems thematically to be playing it to the lair, but you really only want to be playing it to these 2 middle locations. Same deal with the palace as well. You don't want to play it to the palace because as soon as you're going to lock this back up, you immediately lose the ability to use the Cauldron's action, even if you're not using Grow Giant to take it. So that's actually one major note to think about with this too. Is that, you want to make sure that these activate cards, minus the crown to some extent, obviously, you want to try to play in the middle. And we'll probably talk about that when we get to the eels, is that these are probably the best locations to play those activate types of cards. You guys have anything to add on to Grow Giant before we move on to the next card? Or do we pretty much?
Well, I think we can't leave Grow Giant without talking about the fate shenanigans.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
And I actually think there are a couple other things we should talk about too. But let's start with the fate actions too.
Let's start with that. Zach, would you like to talk about the fate action, please?
Well, one of the dirtiest things that any villain in this game could do is go to the shore and play 2 copies of Grow Giant to take multiple fate actions and essentially fate your opponent twice in one turn.
It's lovely.
That is lovely. That's the exact words your opponent will use as soon as you do it to them. That was so lovely. Thank you so much for fating me twice in one turn. Now, Grow Giant, typically you're not going to want to use it to fate. In fact, I very rarely will use it to fate. I'm going to use it to gain power. I'm going to use it to move a hero. I'm going to use it so that it has more utility, but it doesn't restrict you from fating. Unlike other cards like the Raven or the Chariot that lets you perform an additional action, you can't use them to fate. Same thing with the Ruffians for Ratigan. Grow Giant, however, does not have that restriction. So you can come to the ship, you can fate, you can come to the shore, you can use it to fate, go back to the ship, fate, come back to the shore, use it to fate. And especially if you have the palace open as well too, if you're just going between these locations and fating every single turn, that's where Ursula can become really, really fate spammy. And that goes back to sort of what we talked about with the whole fate discussion we had the other week, where if you are fating your opponent a lot, you are doing it at the expense of your own progress. One thing that people need to realize when it comes to fate actions, especially with Ursula, is when you are fating your opponent to slow them down, you are also slowing yourself down.
Correct.
You are using Grow Giant to fate. You are not able to use it to get the utility of moving a hero. You're not able to use it to get the utility of the extra power. Or even if you're in a pinch where you have an item here and you can't use that move, you can use the move action to move the items.
Another
So
pinch
keep in
too.
mind that Grow Giant should only be used to fate, in my opinion anyway, when it's really necessary. If you're locked out and you have the palace locked and you can't fate next turn, the other opponent's going to win, obviously use Grow Giant to stop them. Knowing that Ursula can potentially fate from any location is kind of scary as your opponent. But early game, you don't need to fate, then don't. Use it to get power, use it to get more utility. Even though you have that ability, it's tempting to want to play really heavy defense. Don't do it unless it's necessary. That's my 2 cents on it.
Agreed.
And I've got a separate thought on Grow Giant, and then I'm
Please
going to
do.
address a question that Pikmin added. Say that you're blocked at the shore and you're still needing to find your items, or you're still needing to find more cards. While you can go here and fate and discard, you can also come here and activate a card, but also play Grow Giant to use your discard action. So you can use your activate, you can vanquish a hero, you can start playing some control around the crown, looking at your next 2 fate cards. You can see what's coming, but also you can move an eel into position and use them to vanquish, or you can activate the cauldron, and gain power off of that. So Grow Giant just has a lot of versatility that people need to latch onto and take into consideration, while also addressing that, yeah, you can use it to fate. If you have both Grow Giants and the shore is covered, you can go to the shore, play Grow Giant to move the hero, and then you can do whatever you want with Grow Giant. You can choose to fate, you can choose to move another hero. If there's one at the lair, you can move another one to the ship, and now you've got much more action economy. So,
yeah,
take
I
those
agree.
thoughts into consideration when you bring up Grow Giant.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, and this goes back to a little bit what I talked about at the beginning, is that she has a lot of tools, and you have to be open to all those different tools with her. Because if you're limiting Grow Giant to even like when I was talking about, it was just like, oh, gain 3. Oh, I can move a hero. You know, even bringing in Fate, there's only 3 things, but literally like what you said, Empro, is the fact that as soon as you start putting eels out, as soon as you put the cauldron out, as soon as, oh, I need to go dig for my cards. When you start opening up to all these different possibilities with Grow Giant, there's a lot more that you can use. And really the idea behind Grow Giant is just making it so there's this giant tool set. I've been reading a lot of articles recently about, making sure that you're using your knowledge as tools rather than just, memorization stuff. And like, yeah, we're memorizing like, oh, Grow Giant can be used to fate or gain power. But no, using it as a tool rather than just some type of knowledge or like some memory knowledge in your brain is really going to help you understand how to play this character a lot better. Now, the thing is, it will take some practice, because obviously everything we were discussing right now with even just Grow Giant, is going to take situations to occur. So like even what you were showing off, Empro, it's going to take those situations to occur for you to notice that stuff. But in those situations, when you know you can do that, it's going to help you in a pinch, literally to be able to activate when you're at Eric's ship, when you're at Ursula's lair or at the shore and you can't discard, use it to discard desperately, stuff like that. I think that's some really important tactics to think about when using all of her cards, because that's how we can kind of transition to some more of these cards over here. Whirlpool is essentially you can move a hero anywhere. And kind of like what you were talking about with Grow Giant, let's say Ariel was here and you really need to discard and want to use that other play card for something. You can spend 1 to play Whirlpool and you can move them to any keyword unlocked location. Cannot move them to locked locations. So you can immediately just move them wherever you need to and then get access to your actions, as well as if they have a contract attached to them. Let's say Ariel was right there. I play it and she go bye-bye. But what's nice about this, it's not adjacent. It's anywhere. So anywhere in this general area. So if Ariel was right here and the contract was already on her, I can play a Whirlpool, move her over, and defeat her that way as well. Wow, we're really just trying to murder Ariel today. I wonder why. Um, and obviously it's not just used for defeating your heroes. It's also for managing them too, which is kind of why the whole conversation of stacking heroes is a thing. Figuring out where you're going to move them to make sure you get the most utility off of your locations, I think is super key as well. Um, any thoughts on Whirlpool?
So going back to the hero stacking option, I personally believe that hero stacking defensively is incredibly strong, whether it's Ursula or any other character in the Villainous game. Just having the ability to move heroes and save your action economy is massive. If you have them here and you're able to remove them, you're opening up a third of your action economy just by moving those heroes out of the way for a turn. Like you're spending one turn to get everybody in one spot. And I think that's incredibly valuable.
Why do you think that's valuable in the case of Ursula? Is it just specifically so that way you just know that you have those important locations opened up for yourself?
Mostly, if you've got both Eric's ship and the shore covered up, whether or not you've got the palace or the lair locked, you're reducing half of your action economy in the middle two spots. No matter what, you've only got 8 actions that you can ever do on the board. If you're able to stack them, now you've got 10 between each spot. If you have your lair covered, yes, when it's locked, you'll have 10 on one side. On the other side, you'll have 8. If you're able to move a hero from one of these edge locations into the center, you're able to free up your action economy no matter what state you're in.
It's a really good way of looking at that. That's a very,
Yep.
very, very good way of looking at that. With that being said, I do want to add on top of this
Yeah.
because, as a lot of folks probably have heard me scream from the top of the rooftops, as the vanquishing monster, I don't typically like to hero stack, but it seems like you do. Do you tend to like to hero stack more often than vanquish with Ursula, or vice versa? Would you mind speaking your mind? Because I would like to know.
Yes. So personally, I like to hero stack as Ursula. Early game, I believe that stacking at Eric's ship is very valuable because you're usually bouncing between these 2 discard actions to search for tools that you're looking for, or just discarding tools that you don't need right now. But I also believe that late game, you should really be valuing those play actions. So if you are wanting to play 1 card a turn or deal with things, you may want to actually shift to a hero stack at the shore. And you can use that with Poor Unfortunate Souls. You can move each hero to an adjacent unlocked location. So if you've been stacking at Eric's ship and you want to change gears and be able to play a card every turn, you can go to the shore and play not only 1 card, but Poor Unfortunate Souls, cover this up, and now you've got free actions at Eric's ship and the lair to work with. And so I'm usually thinking how to stack effectively, especially since a lot of Ursula's heroes are, when they're played, effects. So having them out on the board doesn't really affect you too much. They don't have any ongoing effects. So vanquishing them only gives your opponent an opportunity to bring back that when played effect. That's how I look at it, personally.
I got you.
And that's why I stack most of the time.
You know what? I actually like what you're saying there with the late, specifically the late game stuff, because the Poor Unfortunate Souls card, which we'll get to, it's a little bit of an awkward card because there's only 1 copy of it, but that actually really helps accelerate that strategy as long as you have it at the ready. Because if you are stacking, literally like what you said, when you're in the early game and you need to stack, yeah, you want to value your ability to cycle through cards, but if you play Poor Unfortunate Souls in the late game when you need to play more cards, you can instantly shift that wherever you need it to go, which I think is great. Because that's every single hero. So that's not just 1, that's not 2, that's every single hero. So if for some reason you have 5 heroes at Eric's ship, you can instantly just shift them all over with the cost of only 2 power, which I think is actually a great idea.
With the exception of if King Triton's in
That's
that
true.
stack, but we'll talk more about that.
And we'll talk about the king later. I think that was great. I think that's a great observation. I didn't even think about that before. You're even opening my eyes.
Okay, I also want to talk about another kind of nutty combo too.
Nutty
It
combo.
involves 4 Unfortunate Souls and Opportunist, okay? And I believe you need 3 power. So if you go to the shore, you gain 3 power. You can actually spend 2 to play. I think it also involves having the lair lock. So you can move your 4 Unfortunate Souls here. You can spend 1 to get it back with Opportunist. And then the next turn, go to the ship, play Poor Unfortunate Souls, and move them over to the palace if you want to ignore them for the rest of the game. Now, I think I accounted having 2 extra power for when King Triton is involved as well. If King Triton is at the ship at the start, you move him to the shore with everybody else. And then on the second Poor Unfortunate Souls, you move him back to the ship if you've got, say, a lair contract on him. So
interesting.
Yeah, just some interesting combos it's an interesting combo that I thought of and thought I'd share with the community.
I like that. I didn't think about that. See, this is why I had you.
The other one that I like doing, which is actually kind of similar, where if you have heroes, similar situation, you have heroes at the shore. Let's say you have Ariel early and you have, I don't know, maybe Sebastian, Eric hanging out. If you have these cards in your hand, go here, gain 3, spend 2, Poor Unfortunate Souls. Everybody can go live happily ever after in the palace while I spend change form to lock them up, never to be seen again. All these heroes are locked there for good.
That even just starting at 0 power, you can do that combo. Like, he didn't need any extra power for this. Maybe 1 if you had King Triton on the board, but like you could do that at any point while the palace is unlocked.
Exactly, especially if you can get Grimsby in there too, and know that that palace is never going to be unlocked again unless you choose it will be. You get all these heroes that are never going to be in your way, and then you just get to have all of your action economy until somebody else comes out, but these are never going to bother you.
And I want to note that I will always leave Grimsby out on the board because his play action directly interferes with my strategy of play. And so I never want to see my opponent open up the lair or change the lock token in their control. I want to be in control of moving the lock token, not them.
That's a good point.
Pretty selfish, but yeah.
Well, yeah, exactly. We're villains, man. You gotta be selfish.
Yeah.
Yep.
Exactly. Wow, that was some really good insight stuff right there. My brain just imploded a little bit. Jeez.
Yeah.
That was a really good stuff. Yeah. So quick rundown. Poor Unfortunate Souls is a 2-coster that allows you to move any hero or each and every hero in the realm to an adjacent location. So it's not any location, but it's essentially a move all. This is great for literally like what my friends here just showed off. Where literally, if you need to control, but you don't want to spend 3 power to play 3 different copies of Whirlpool to get the job done, obviously, Poor Unfortunate Souls will do that as well. And it also will help if you're going to stack contracts onto these suckers. And also in this situation, too, if you got all these doodads like this, you can just choose to move them all to one particular spot, which also helps kind of clear some stuff.
One card play, you freed up 4 actions.
Exactly. Yeah.
So nice.
It's great. So
yeah, that's something you should point out is that it could be multiple adjacent locations. It doesn't have to be like we talked about shifting the whole stack.
And say that you had a contract on Ariel, you could even move her and vanquish her in that action.
Yep.
Not only do you stack, but you also get rid of a huge threat in your deck.
Bye, Ariel. No one likes you. But yeah, no.
What did you say? No one likes you?
Yeah. Nobody likes you. One thing to point out about Poor Unfortunate Souls, which you may have already noticed, there's only one copy of it. So you will need to, it is, I don't want to call it situational, but kind of like what Empro showed off with the copy of Opportunist, you can get it back into your hand, because if we actually jump into Opportunist here, it allows you to fetch back items or effects in your discard pile and put them back into your hand. So it's used as kind of a recycle tool. Let's say you use some Grow Giants and Whirlpools or Poor Unfortunate Souls. If you want those back, they're all effects. So you can grab those back. The same thing with the items. All the binding contracts are items. So if you need a binding contract after you defeated a hero or discarded one because you're trying to free up room, you can use the Opportunist to go ahead and grab those back. This is a great card to basically help get those effects that you really want back into your hand, as well as these items as well.
You can also retrieve the unique items as well using Opportunist in the case that somehow they got discarded, which may occur if you play Divination.
Correct. That is a great point, Empro. So Divination is an interesting card. So what it does is that when you play it, you basically reveal cards from the top of your deck until you pull a binding contract. And when you pull the binding contract, that stops, and all other revealed cards get discarded in the process. So kind of similar to a card like Scrying from Jafar's deck, where you basically choose ally or item, and then you basically reveal till you get that particular card type, then discard everything else. But Divination fixates it to only binding contracts. So that means that any effect, any condition, any ally, any item that's not a binding contract is going to be discarded. So it is possible that you can use Divination as a fishing tool to kind of go find your key items, but you'll need to keep in mind that you are going to be losing a lot of other tools in the process, possibly. You might lose your powerful condition cards. You may lose in one of your eel boys. And on top of that, if you do discard a few copies of Opportunist, you are limited on what you can do with those as well in those circumstances. So when you're playing Divination, I would be a little cautious when you do it, when play it. I've definitely done it before to get some binding contracts to help defeat characters. But if you do plan on trying to use it to maybe like dig through to find a particular card, just gotta make sure you got an Opportunist ready to go in the chamber. So that way, if you discard a Trident or a Crown, you're not going to set yourself back, because the only way you're getting that card back at that point is a deck reshuffle. And that would suck.
Yep. I will point out that with Divination, there are only 6 binding contracts. That's something we didn't mention when we talked about them earlier, but there is 1 copy for the lair, 1 copy for the palace, and then there are 2 for the ship and 2 for the shore, as those are the middle locations. But there are only 6 contracts. So Divination is looking for a 1 in 6 chance of getting a contract, especially if you have 1 or 2 in your hand. You know you're looking for fewer cards at that point. So there are times when you might play Divination and it will go through 1 or 2 cards, and I'm seeing Divination go through 20 cards, including the Crown, the Trident, and 2 Opportunists, and then you're kind of screwed. So definitely keep in mind that unlike Scrying, where like if you're Jafar, you have, I believe, 6 allies or 8 items, you have options. Ursula only has 6 contracts, and especially if you have 1 or 2 in your hand, realize you could be discarding a lot. So my personal philosophy is I tend to only play Divination if I have an Opportunist in hand as backup. I tend to do it more defensively, unless, of course, like you mentioned, Jonesy, if you're just using it to find a contract you need to vanquish, then by all means do it, get ready to play it. But if you're using it to try to mill through your deck, just like you mentioned, know that there's a good chance you could not only blow through the cards you really want, but a lot of your other tools that could be helpful as well. So just keep that in mind with that card.
Yeah, I do want to mention that early game Divination allows you to dig deep into your deck. And if you do have Divination and Opportunist in your hand at the beginning, don't toss them out. Because if you do go through, say you go through 10 cards before finding a binding contract, Opportunist now has up to 10 cards that you can retrieve using that card. The only cards that you can't retrieve using Opportunist are your 2 copies of Arrogance, 2 copies of Trickery, and your 2 eel boys. All of these cards right here, you can retrieve using Opportunist. If you don't feel like you need any of your effect tools or you haven't discarded any of your key items, you can retrieve Divination again and dig further into your deck for your next contract. And so keep your mind open to all these opportunities while also keeping in mind all the hazards, as Zach has pointed out himself. While you can blow through your items, you can also get through a lot of cards that, while they offer utility in the mid game, don't do anything for you at the very start of the game while you don't have any heroes out.
Yes, this card is perfectly named.
Yes.
Use it at the opportune time. Be
Literally was
opportunist
about
when
to
you
say
play.
that. You read my mind.
I also want to say, if you have an opportunist and your entire deck is in your discard pile, please use it. You can grab anything in your discard pile, any card in your deck that you want, need, or could need. You can grab it. I watched a game where somebody played a key item that turn, and then the next turn they were wanting to do something else, but didn't have access to those cards. They were discarding, still milling through their deck to find something. And I pointed out at the end of the game, if you played your opportunist and then played the key item, you'd have any card that you would have needed before this reshuffle. And that also kind of brings up why shuffling your discard pile is so devastating to Ursula too, is that with opportunist, you've got so many opportunities to grab tools and use them to your advantage.
I
And
could
somebody
not
like
agree more.
Flounder could disrupt that.
Yeah, I know. And then Flounder comes in and just makes you have a sad day. I absolutely agree with this. It's funny that I'm about to bring up Marvel, but like there's a whole concept in Marvel where they actually have a lot of different abilities and effects that allow you to access your discard pile. And there are cards in that game that allow you to basically screw with the ability to work with your discard pile. And that is kind of inherent actually very much with Ursula. That's kind of that core where that came from because Ursula definitely wants to use Opportunist a lot, to grab back those effects that she wants to use again. That's why that card literally exists to grab stuff back. And something to keep in mind with Opportunists, if I may add, is it's a kind of a weird combination. I actually had this happen to me another day when I was playing. I think it was on stream actually. I had both of these cards in hand, turn one. While these cards are much needed, you do not have 8 power at the beginning of the game, nor will you ever have 8 power at the beginning of the game. I may, excuse me, as I'm dying, I may have overdone it on discarding the crown, but you don't need both of them. Remember that opportunist is a thing. So if you are not ready to play these, chuck them, knowing that opportunist is there. And yes, Flounder will come in and make you have a sad day. But you also need to keep in mind the fact that the more of these cards that you actually are able to put out on the board, the smaller your deck is going to be. Keep in mind Binding Contracts, Cauldron, Eel Boys, including the stuff that's in your hand. That all comes into play if that happens. So it's important to make sure that you are playing these cards that do stay in the realm, because Ursula doesn't have a lot of those that inherently always stay in the realm. But, if that happens, opportunists can come help grab that item back. And if Flounder comes out and makes you try to have a sad day after, I'm like, oh, I'm going to discard the Trident because I can't play it right now. If you are able to play more of these out into the fray, your chances of that or drawing that back up is going to be a lot easier. It's not going to always be a perfect deck, but it will be a lot easier to manage at the very least.
Yes. And I kind of want to piggyback on that idea as well. While you can't retrieve conditions with Opportunist, you also can't retrieve allies. So if you are playing your allies out on the board, whenever you do cycle using Divination or say Arrogance, your Opportunist becomes better with those 2 allies on the board. Every card that you're discarding can be a condition, but also items and effects. And there are so many more effects and items than there are conditions that you'll immediately gain more value by not having to reshuffle these allies and discard into the deck.
Yep. I know we joked about at the beginning that part of your world is not part of this deck. However, when Ursula plays Opportunist with a bunch of cards in her discard pile, she is staying. Look at this stuff. Isn't it neat? Wouldn't you think my collection complete to pull out whatever card I want to play?
Exactly. I love that. That was perfect. Speaking of the eels,
An
Empro, I know
opportunity.
you want to talk about the eels.
Yes, I
So
do.
let's do the general overview of the eels really quickly. So what these are is that what's also unique about these, also in comparison with Evil Queen, is that these allies are never going to go away once they're played. However, their positioning very much does matter because how they work is that they are both 2 cost, 4 strength allies. They both have their Flotsam and Jetsam, but they're essentially the same thing, just with different artwork. Essentially, when you want to take the activate action, you activate the eel to basically move one of the heroes from that location to an adjacent location. So rather than having to spend any money to actually move the hero, all you have to do is take the activate action while you're at Ursula's lair to activate the eel, and then you can defeat heroes or mitigate, position them around so they're better for your action economy, kind of what Empro was talking about earlier, so to speak. It is very important on their placement. Usually, what I like to do is make sure that they are placed at both the shore and Eric's ship for obvious reasons, because kind of what Empro was talking about. These 2 locations are always going to be active, so having these tools out ready to go to take those types of actions is pretty solid. You're not going to always have both of them out in play. One thing I would recommend that you keep in mind is that there is this move action right here. So let's say that maybe you have a binding contract in hand that's going to defeat them when they're moved to Eric's ship, and then you also have one for the shore. So what you may do is that when the hero is here, you defeat them, conk them out, move them over here, and prep your next defeat. Stuff like that. So just keep that in mind. That is something you can do with the eels. I know the move item action is really mainly utilized to move one of the key items to Ursula's lair, but you can use it on the allies. It's just as effective. One thing I will say, for all of you folks that are maybe slightly new to the game, never play an eel to Ursula's lair. There is a reason for that. The main reason is the fact that, guess what? If a hero is covering Ursula's lair, Ursula has no ability to take the activate action while a hero is covering it. So there's absolutely no reason to ever play an eel to one of those locations. You may get a little feisty and do something like this if you have Grow Giant to take the activate action, but I've only done that once in all of my Ursula games to do that. It is a very rare circumstance, and maybe something you may need to do, but I would not always 100% recommend it because the palace itself is already pretty strong with its move hero action. So unless you need to kind of duplicate up to defeat stuff, I wouldn't recommend doing that. So these are my 2 best placements for the eels. Now, it does seem like Empro has some interesting insights about Flotsam and Jetsam, so I will let Empro kind of take over this portion here.
It's kind of funny because you actually took most of those insights out of my mouth. I had actually asked Zach, just as a theoretical question, is there any reason not to play Flotsam and Jetsam to the shore? And you covered them exactly. If you play them to Ursula's lair, it can get covered, and no matter whether you're at the lair or the ship, you can't activate when that action is covered. So you never want to have an eel at the lair. And likewise at the palace, if you do end up with a eel at the palace, your only way to activate them is indeed going to the ship, but you've already got this move a hero action for free. So odds are you're just going to be going here and moving and not really using Grow Giant to move a hero. Plus, say that you're looking to change gears and put the lock token back here. Oh no, I never moved my eel. Your eel is now stuck at the palace, and you can't get him out without changing form and then changing form again. So most of the time, these eels want to stay at the ship and the shore. As well, if you do only have one, like Jonesy said, you can vanquish at a spot and then move the eel back. But also, you can move an eel to a location where a hero is ready to vanquish and activate them to vanquish that hero.
Exactly. It's a great point. Now, you couldn't do that with Ariel specifically. Ariel's not the greatest example, but no, but I've done that before, though. Absolutely correct, though.
Yes. You can use them either before vanquishing or if they're already at that location to vanquish. There's no reason at all to stack the eels. You're losing the efficiency on your eels if you stack them.
Correct.
As well, they're aside from the move hero action, they're the only action to move a hero that is free. So if you go to Ursula's lair and activate an eel, you are moving a hero for free. Whirlpool costs 1, Poor Unfortunate costs 2. After a 2 power investment on an eel, it's free, no matter when you do it.
Yep.
Even with King Triton, who increases the cost of effects that are played to him and of attaching a binding contract to him, you can still move him for free. Using the eel does not add a power to that action. And so
Eel kills are
I-
great. They're fantastic.
Yep.
Use them.
When you
They're
have
your
eels
eel
on the
boys.
board,
They're also
whether
your
your
eel
palace is
homies.
open or closed, you get to move somebody either way.
Mhm.
Correct.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think while we're on the topic of these activate actions, I do kind of want to go back to Pigman's question about the crown.
Sure.
So he ended up asking that with the whole lock thing, is there ever a time where you play the crown anywhere other than the lair? And I would argue no, because if you have the lair unlocked and you go to the lair, you can activate the crown and prepare for your next fate action or your opponent's next fate action. And you can then either go here and fate your opponent, maybe covering their next top fate action, or go here and make more progress. If you have the lock on the lair while the crown is at the lair, it's safe. You don't need to worry about it being at the ship, the shore, or the palace and having to move it. I don't see a reason for having the crown at Eric's ship just to have the versatility of activating it while you're at the ship. There may be some pro players who have this 5-head, like, okay, we can now manipulate our fate deck while in this position, but that's only with Grow Giant. And you're putting yourself at a huge risk by having the crown at Eric's ship, and especially if Ariel is not on the board yet, she can be played and take the crown all the way to
Ariel.
the pallet. And so you really don't want to risk that.
Yep. And all it takes is one hero to shut it down anyway. If there's any hero at the ship, you're not going to be able to activate that crown.
And you'd have to move here to even move that hero off to have a chance at activating the crown again. Your opponent could fade again and put another hero on the board. And now you have to go here. And you can't activate the crown and look ahead. So.
And you're sad. You're very, very sad.
You're very sad.
One thing
So,
I
Yeah.
will
Oh,
say.
that's even worse.
One thing I will say about this conversation.
Oh, wait.
That there was one circumstance that I did do something one time, but it was only because of this scenario. I was playing against somebody, and I had them so their top fate action was blocked, and they had already fated me. I was in this position. I went to the shore, knowing that I had change form and crown in my hand. Ariel was not in play. I went ahead and played the crown here, just to get it out. The reason for that, like I said, to get it out of my hand so it's not staying in my hand, and then I could discard other things. I can go ahead and play change form, unlock this, knowing that next turn, nothing was going to stop me from moving. Oh, clicked on the debug menu. No, go away. What'd I do? Game, go away. Don't do this to me. I opened the menus. There we go. Disney Villainous, everybody. Actually, TTS. I can just go over here, move the crown, bada bing, bada boom. Nothing was going to stop me. So if you do find yourself in a circumstance where you know your opponent cannot fate you back, and you are in that position where you have the crown, can play it, and easily can move it to the lair, I would suggest go ahead and doing it, because, like I was talking about earlier, these items are just going to sit in your hand until you are ready to play them. Once you're ready to play them, play them. Now, in that circumstance that was brought up, it is definitely, there is no reason really to play them anywhere else. Definitely not the shore, definitely not the palace. Eric's ship in that circumstance, absolutely. Because literally all you got to do is, no matter where you are, when that's locked, go to the shore, knowing that you have change form and the crown playable, just go ahead and play them. Get them out of your hand, lock it up, do all what you need to do. So that way, guarantee next turn you can move that over there. Nothing's gonna harm you. Nice thing too is you can even activate it. Still play another card, gain a power, so maybe you can Whirlpool, or maybe change form again if you have it to lock it up, so you don't have to worry about it. Stuff like that. So that did happen to me one game. It was only one game that happened to me, but I did recognize that was something I could do. But that, like I said, it's a situation where your opponent is definitely not going to fade you next turn. Because as soon as you put that crown out there, you are immediately a threat. So keep
And
that
I
in
will
mind.
say, as soon as you're in this position with the crown and trident in the lair, if you are at the lair and can activate the crown, then you guarantee yourself a win.
Yep.
Because if
Especially
Ariel's on top, you
Ariel.
discard her. They get returned to form. It can only go to your location anyway, so she's not going to steal your item. If she's not on top, you win. If she is on top, get rid of her, you win. So if you can ever get to the position where you can come to the lair, either play the crown. So let's say you had vanquished King Trident and you had the Trident there. You had a bunch of power. You can come to the lair, play the crown for 4, and then activate it, seal and guarantee your win. It's just like if you're at the shore and you have a bunch of power, you can play the crown for 4, lock it with change form. There are a lot
Lock it up.
Lock it up. There are 2 different ways that Ursula can guarantee her win condition no matter what. And that's outside of if Ariel's already on the board and you've ignored her and she can't come back out to steal items.
God, I hate Ariel.
So there are a lot of ways that Ursula can 100% secure her victory.
Yes.
Unlike the other villains where you have to pray to RNGesus that you hope you don't get screwed at the end by another Hakuna Matata for the 6th time in a row, Ursula can seal her victory with
RNGesus
combat.
gods. If you love me today, I will love you tomorrow. Don't let Ariel come out, because I've had too many games where I've been in this circumstance and I just prayed and we'll get to you. We'll get to you.
I think that using the crown in that situation is also a good reason for why you may want to consider playing the crown early too.
Correct.
If you say go to the shore and get enough power to play the crown early, you can then come here, activate the crown, and look ahead. If you find, oh, I found Ariel and a Snarfblat, Ariel is coming out to be played at the shore, you can actually just go ahead and discard her. And if the next fate action is a return form, your opponent is forced to play Ariel to the lair. Return to form at the end of it says play that hero to Ursula's location, meaning that she has to go here and she can't move the crown. So you've already locked down part of your win condition. The crown won't be moving.
Yep. Another thing I like doing too is even avoiding Ariel is you want to avoid cards that are situational. So let's say you're in this situation where you have King Trident on the board and you have a bunch of power with the Trident out and you want to play a binding contract to kill him, but you're afraid of a certain crab that might steal that contract. What you can do, and let's say you have like a Grow Giant or a Whirlpool in your hand, so you know that I could play the contract and kill him, but if he comes out next turn, that will screw me over so much. You can activate the crown, see if you're safe. He's on top. Crap. Nope, I'm not playing that contract just yet. Or, nope, we're going to stick him in the discard pile and make sure he doesn't steal my contract. So then I can play it, and then next turn, go kill the king, get to my win condition, maybe even lock it up. And especially if you know Ariel's already not on top, that information of knowing what's coming in your fate deck, kind of like Give Them a Scare with Captain Hook. It's the exact same ability. You can put both back or discard both, but that information can allow you to plan out exactly what you need. Sometimes it's all it takes is to know that the next fate is not going to stop you or slow you down, and you can just speed towards what you need to do, knowing that your opponent's not going to get there, especially if you can block their top fate and know they can only fate you every other turn, and their next fate's going to be a whiff or something that's not going to matter to you. You know that you're 3 or 4 turns. You have 3 or 4 turns where you're safe and you can do what you do. And if you can get it done fast enough, they're not going to be able to stop you.
You can let your opponent force it out.
Yeah, exactly. That's another thing too, is that
Yep.
if you know that those cards are going to be dead draws and you don't want to cycle through that deck faster, you can basically use Crown to be like, all right, well, the next 2 cards are 2 Snarf Blats. There's no heroes on the board. So I'll let them draw the fake fate and let it slide.
Yep. One thing that does need to be pointed out, which Baron's pointing out in the chat, and I have done this before and made this dumb mistake, is if I want to play the Trident, make sure you play that before you activate the crown. Because if I activate the crown, look at the top 2 cards, guess what? I play the Trident, bring out King Trident. What do you have to do when you find King Trident? Shuffle the deck and lose that information you just gained. So make sure you just work around that. If you're going to play the Trident to pull out the king and he's not in the discard pile, do that before you activate the crown so you don't lose that information. Because I've done that before, and it's not fun to waste that.
Tactical information.
Technical information. Keep it in mind.
So I guess really the last thing we should talk about with the villain deck here is the conditions, which one of them is incredibly good. The other
incredibly not so much.
Yeah, the other one's not so much. So let's talk about the good one first. So Trickery. Trickery is probably hands down one of the best conditions in the game. Hands down. Essentially what it is that, hey, you power hoarders out there, if you're gonna have 6 or more power in your reserve at any point during your turn, you play Trickery and get to play the top card of their Fate deck. So essentially like Deception with Jafar. The only difference is, unlike Jafar, where it requires you to actually have items in play in your realm, Trickery requires you to have the basic necessity thing that all villains need to use in order to progress towards anything that they do. And if they're holding too much of it, you can play Trickery. It's incredibly good against characters who need to gain lots of power or inherently will gain lots of power. It will force them not to be able to do the abilities that give them lots of money. Even when it comes to the players where they have to essentially, do an action, spend stuff first, and then gain power, stuff like that. This still stops certain circumstances. I know, as me playing a lot of Corella recently, in those giant turns where you can gain lots of power, playing like I Live for Furs, I can't do that anymore. Especially if it's going to be a card that's going to be stuck in my hand. So even if they're not going to pop the Trickery off, just knowing that you may have it is going to scare them and not play cards. And then guess what? If people aren't playing cards, they're clogging up their hand, not being able to play anything. So it's a win-win either way. You are basically slowing them down. So any character that can generate lots of power is going to get slowed down by Trickery, regardless if it gets played or not. It's what makes it really good.
And Pikmin is pointing out in the chat that Trickery is the screw Prince John condition.
Oh, yeah. Yes, I do agree with that statement.
Because Prince John's not going to be able to avoid it.
Go ahead, bro.
Yes. While Trickery is such a good card, you can, since Ursula is going to be cycling so much through her deck, because all of her cards are really reactionary, as Joker has said before, and they require a certain situation to play. Even discarding Trickery when your opponent's playing really guarded and trying not to get to 6 power might lead them later in the game to meeting that 6 power condition later when you've drawn your second Trickery. So even though you may want to hold on to it and activate it on just anybody, you can also discard it and let your opponent feel, okay, I'm a bit secure. I can gain whatever I need and start planning better. Oh, here comes the second Trickery. Oh no, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. No, because I mean, like, even what you're talking about, the discarding, like, you can even be like discarding it in the early game, both copies of it, and then once you reshuffle your deck later in the game, guess what? Your opponent is already in this nice, comfy mood of having 5-6 power, and as soon as they get 6 power, boom, Trickery. They don't know when it's coming because you reshuffle your deck, you're drawing new cards. So you can smack them right back in the face. It is a win-win card. It is lovely. It is literally a trick. It's great. Now, the other card, Arrogance.
On the other hand,
it's a little weirder. I do find this card useful, but at certain points in the game, it's kind of bad. So essentially what it does is that the timing of it's weird, which already makes it an odd card. So when a hero is defeated of a strength of 4 or more, you can play Arrogance, and then essentially you draw 3 cards, and then you have to discard any 3 cards from your hand. This is really nice when you need to reset your hand, when you kind of have a bunch of stuff that you can't really use right away. However, when you're in a situation where you have a lot of useful cards, let's say you have a binding contract that's about to kill King Triton, you have, the crown in hand, stuff like that. Arrogance isn't that great. It's kind of nice to get it out of your hand, maybe see what's coming up in your deck, if you feel comfortable doing that. But it's kind of its trigger is really odd, and it's overall just a very situational card. It can be really good when Ursula really needs to kind of go through her cards and try to find better cards when she doesn't have great ones for the situation she's in. But yeah, so Arrogance is a little bit harder of one to work with personally. I usually end up chucking this one, although there have been times, especially when you're working with the more Vanquish heavy characters or characters that have a lot more 4-strength heroes that they definitely need to take out. Arrogance might be worth holding on to, but it's a very much more situational card, I would say.
Yeah. I will say that 4-strength requirement too is tough. After the base game, every other defeat a hero condition has been 3-strength, whether it's Rage or Ferocity or Devilish or Duplicity. They all are defeat a hero of 3 or less. There are 3 other villains in the base set, though, with Captain Hook with Obsession, Queen of Hearts with Fury, and Maleficent with Malice that have that same requirement. But I think those cards are just a lot better. Obsession is like, hey, do you want to find Peter Pan or get somebody out of your way to find him? Queen of Hearts says, hey, do you want to shrink 2 heroes and get your action economy back? Maleficent Malice says, hey, do you want to defeat any 4-strength hero in your realm? And Arrogance is, hey, you want to discard some stuff? Go ahead. So it's not as helpful. So you're right. There can be certain situations where, yes, you really need to get to your deck and it can help you do it. But for how difficult it is to trigger and for how little it gives you, unless you know a defeat is coming in the next turn or two, you're right. Just get rid of it.
Yeah.
Don't be arrogant and hold on to it.
Exactly.
I've got to say that if you see your opponent vanquishing a 4-strength or more hero without any discounts, by the way, if your opponent's hero gets discounted below 4 strength, Arrogance does not trigger.
Correct.
But if you see your opponent staging to vanquish a 4-strength or more hero, and you still have it in your hand, consider holding on to it, because one core strategy to Ursula is discard engineering past some of the utility cards that you don't need at a certain point. So being able to draw 3 and discard 3 cards that you don't need is still a really good gain when you're still looking for specific items or specific effects that will help you in the long run.
I definitely agree, because that is one thing it can do, is that even if you're not going to keep any of those cards, you can just chuck cards, which is going to allow you to get through your deck. I think it's a great point.
I have to say, though, I have been guilty of holding on to Arrogance when I thought my opponent was going to vanquish a 4-strength hero. And when they saw that it was actually 5 instead of 4, they're like, no, that's going to be too much strength to sacrifice to get rid of this hero. And I didn't get rid of it. So you need to see what your opponent is doing, okay, are they going to be vanquishing this turn? If you don't see it coming up in the next 2 turns, chuck it. You'll either find another one or just not really have to worry about finding that condition again. To me.
I've been guilty of it too, so don't feel bad, friend.
I personally like the card.
card.
It's tough to land, but when it does land, it's very nice. Just don't rely on it popping every game. It's not. It's something that when it does happen, it'll be very nice.
Yes. Don't arrogantly think that you can trigger it soon.
I think that's really it with Ursula. On the villain
I think the last thing we want to talk about with the villain deck, because we didn't talk about this card that much.
No, that's what I was about to say.
And I was kind of wondering if that was considered covering it.
Yeah, I know.
We've
talked a lot about the shifting around. I would say the
biggest thing. Do you
biggest
play
thing.
It early? Do you protect your lair?
Yeah.
Do you open the palace? What do you guys do?
So my thing, what I like to do, is with change form. I like to play it early. Me personally, I like to play it early. Get it so I can use it for its utility. And the reason why is because, number one, like we said, Ursula needs money. So even though you're not gonna be able to play a card at the palace because it's the only location in the entirety of the game that has no play card, I'm gaining 2 power. I get to move a hero around for free without having to spend anything, and then I can fate. It's a great spot, so that way you can still keep your opponent in check and still gain money. As great as the Eric ship place can be, sometimes you just need to gain a stockpile of cash, and honestly, that's what I find the most out of it. On top of the fact that if I do need to move a hero around, I can use this to do the job. I used to be in the mindset of trying to play the game where don't play change form, and I've learned that honestly, if you can play it early and just stockpiling a bunch of cash moving back and forth, you have to think of both of these power gains are at the bottom for a reason. It's because Ursula needs money. And literally within, essentially 4 turns is going back and forth here, you will have 10 power. 10 power instantly. That's a lot of money that can instantly play the Crown and the Trident, and you're only 1 power away from playing a binding contract on the King Triton himself. That's not including the fact that you already have this free move card. So in between there, if you need to go take care of some heroes to remove your action economy or gain back action economy, that is great. So that's what I personally like to do. Once I'm ready and I have the tools to kind of get what I need to do, I'll move to one of these places, play it again, lock it up for good. I don't try to screw with it again once I'm ready to go. Because usually once you get in the position where you have tons and tons and tons of cash, I mean, granted, you're never going to have that much money, although I've been close. You are pretty good. You don't need to. You can start just going to places and just playing cards willy-nilly and not care. And then those binding contracts look really enticing a lot more of the time. Those moving cards look a lot more enticing. You might take a more gambles on Divination. Even play out these guys just to get them out, so that way you can have a smaller deck to work with. Even I'm not always been a huge fan of the Cauldron, but even playing the Cauldron's like, it's a power. Who cares? That stuff looks a lot easier, and it all just helps the game. So that's personally what I like to use change form for. What about you, Empro? What about you?
Okay, so I do want to talk about how I like to use change form, but also I do want to address Jinx's question. What's a perfect palace turn? So normally when you do go to the palace, this move an ally or item action may be blocked by aerial. But if it isn't, obviously moving a key item would be important. But also, say that early game you stacked at the ship and had an eel at the shore, constantly funneling heroes to the ship. You change form, and now your lock token is here, and everybody's been not here, not her. Everybody's been stacked at the ship. You can use your move action to move Jetsam to the ship, and if you start, say, moving people from the ship to the shore using your move and hero action, and when you go back here and change back, now if anybody comes to the ship, you can go here, activate Jetsam to keep adding to that stack. And so
that's really
and I will add on to that too. Now, options at the palace to vanquish Trident specifically are much more flexible, especially with that move action. So a lot of people, what I see is they're just like, because one thing with King Trident is when he is vanquished, the Trident goes to the location he's vanquished at. So if he's at Eric's ship and you use the Ursula's lair contract, when you move him to the lair, the Trident goes with him to the lair. If you use the shore contract, if he's vanquished and he moves to the shore, the Trident goes to the shore. But keeping in mind that there is only 1 copy of the lair contract and 1 copy of the palace contract, there are 4 copies of the ship and the shore contract. So what I like to do, and the reason I like to have the palace open, is not only you get that power, the fate, you get the free move, but then if you draw one of these cards in your hand, you know you can put Trident either at the shore or the ship, and you have a good chance of drawing one of these 4 contracts. So my perfect palace turn is, you know that you have this contract coming up, you can play it. Guess what you can do next turn? You can get 2 power, you can move King Trident and you can kill him. The Trident goes there, you just immediately move it back to the ship, so it's 1 turn away, and you get your fate in. You got all of those actions in, you got the power, you moved to kill a hero, you moved your item closer, because it didn't matter at that point what the contract was. Yep, and then next turn,
you have change
can bring
form.
you have change form, come up next turn, then go here, and move the Trident and act and play the Crown, or even go here, play Grow Giant to move the Trident.
Yep.
And then play the Crown, whatever it is. It gives you much more flexibility to kill King Trident. I see too many new Ursula players who think, well, the Trident's got to end up at the lair anyway, so the lair contract is the only one I should use. But that's 1 out of your 6 contracts. If you spend your time looking for that one contract, you slow yourself down. If you give yourself 4 contracts, 4 out of 6 instead of 1 out of 6, even the Palace, you could just move Trident to the Palace, use the Palace contract, move the Trident 1 step closer so it's at the shore. And again, 5 out of the 6 contracts will work versus limiting yourself to 1 if you use the Palace. So being able to use that move to kill King Trident, and then if you need to use the Shore or Palace contract, you can already move that item 1 step closer. That's, I think, how you maximize using the Palace early.
No, I agree. I think the biggest point, Zach, you brought up is one thing I would strongly recommend anyone playing Ursula is that I know that this Ursula's Lair binding contract on Triton looks super appetizing. But if you stick to only this plan, you're forcing yourself down a line that you only can play one way on Ursula. One of the things that I think we all struggled with playing Ursula was the fact that, everyone focuses on that one game plan. Any villain in Villainous, you cannot focus on one game plan. You have to be very open-minded to a lot of different ways of playing these characters. And if you focus on, all right, this is the only way I can kill King Triton because it's the most effective, you are going to put yourself in a tunnel that it's going to be very difficult for you to kind of manage around. But what Zach was talking about, if you keep that idea open of, oh, this move action here is here for a reason. It's obvious that, all right, if I kill King Triton at this location with the Trident, then guess what? I can move it. Get some more legwork done off of that. Sure, yeah, Ariel's still susceptible and all that crap, and that's Ariel for you. But it's better to actually use all the actions at the location than not use them all. And finding the use for that particular action and knowing hey, I have all these binding contracts. I should probably use them instead of only focusing on one, because when you only focus on one card, I've said this before, and I talked about this with Hades. When you focus on one card in order to win, when it's not a true key card to win with, that is going to slow you down tremendously. So definitely keep that in mind.
Now, I will say to add on to that, if the first fate is Ariel and one of these other cards, you're in a position where if you don't kill Ariel, you're forced into that one-dimensional play style of, all right, I need that one specific contract. I know I can win once I get to my win condition, because if Ariel's on the board, nothing's going to stop you. But again, you're slowing yourself down. You're limiting yourself to that one specific option.
And I do want to add that if you have this option set up, there is actually a counter to this. Sebastian, when he's played, is actually able to take a contract off of a contracted hero.
Yep.
So now you have to deal with Sebastian and getting that contract back to vanquish Triton.
And your one plan is now stalled by quite a bit.
Yep. So
same thing. If you want to do that, you got rid of all your change forms. Grimsby comes out, moves the lock here. Well, I can't vanquish Trident now because first I need to unlock the lair to do it. You're limiting yourself a lot. And I know there are some situations where it's circumstantial for me. If Ariel comes out early, do I vanquish her or do I not? I think if I have the tools to vanquish Ariel, I'm not afraid to just straight up kill her. I've had a situation where Ariel comes out first turn to the ship, and guess what's in my hand is a short contract and a Whirlpool. So it's going to cost me all 3 power I get there. But you know what? I don't want her in my realm. I want the flexibility. I want the options. And keeping in mind, you can work around her with Return to Form because she can only be played to your location. Yeah, don't be afraid to kill Ariel early. I know it sort of guarantees the win if you can leave her and ignore her, but that makes your game plan far too one-dimensional, especially if you're against a character who can go faster, such as a rat or a doctor or a hook. You're going to take too long to get that one plan, and it's not going to pop off in time.
And one thing I do want to mention that Zach kind of brought up with that is, I've talked about this before with certain characters. One thing I want everyone to keep in mind is that now Ursula, like you said, well, like we've all said, she is a weird case. When you are vanquishing stuff, I do realize that all these basically everything in her, all the heroes and stuff are all reactionary. You know, the only passive effects that exist are on King Triton and Ariel, but even Ariel still has an immediate effect that triggers. But you need to keep in mind, if you take out Ariel, and then all of a sudden, what happens is, let's say King Triton's out with the Trident, and you got this little shenanigans going on right now. Ariel's dead. Return to form or Sebastian. What are you going to do? Obviously, in this scenario, yeah, you're going to play Sebastian, but all right, well, you know, hold on a second. Let's say we switch this up to this. What are they going to do? You now are forcing your opponent to make a decision, because both of those circumstances are bad. Because, yeah, obviously, in this situation right here, you cannot move the Trident past Eric's ship when Ariel comes out. If you play Sebastian, guess what? Sebastian seals the binding contract. But you are forcing your opponent to make that decision. Because if Ariel is still out, guess what? Sebastian's going to come out and steal that contract. Even better, let's say even Flounder or whatnot, it gets pulled, and you haven't found the other key item yet. You know, forcing your opponent to make these decisions is what's going to help. Yeah, it sucks to deal with Ariel on a constant loop, but I'll tell you one thing. I'd rather not have to deal with this stupid crabman, you know, over and over and over again, you know, knowing that Ariel is going to be an option. And soon, all of a sudden, Ariel becomes no longer the valued card in certain circumstances. But if she's going to stay out there, she's just going to make making the decision tree process for your opponent fading you a lot easier to do. Now, there are circumstances, like we've talked about, you can be passive, and I think towards the end game, you can play a little bit that way. But definitely in the early game, like, don't be afraid to take care of problems, because no one likes it when the problems creep up on you. So yeah, that's Ursula. That's Ursula's villain deck. I think we covered a lot of questions.
I actually kind of want to get us back on track a little bit, because
Sure.
we got a bit distracted by the palace question, and I want to say that it's okay if you go to the palace and you don't use the move an ally or item action. Like, you don't have to use every action every turn.
Oh no,
But
absolutely.
if you are able to, and you notice that using that action will benefit you, use it. And I think I didn't get a chance to really explain how I feel about change form as well.
God,
So I
yeah,
do wanna
please
address that.
do, friend.
So going back into Jonesy's early change form, while I do believe that change form into an early change form allows you a lot better versatility in gaining money, you also kind of need to gauge your opponent and see, will they need a lot of fate pressure? Will I need to have both of my fate spots available to me at any point? If you don't feel that way, if your opponent is going to be a slower character who doesn't need as much fate pressure but needs more win condition pressure, then you may want to actually avoid playing change form and focus on finding your win condition elements, your crown and your trident. But if you notice that your opponent can play a faster game and you need to be searching and dealing with their fast win condition pressure, then totally change form early and go to the palace, shore, and be passively searching while you're also reacting to your opponent. Otherwise, I usually don't see a reason to voluntarily change form in the middle of the game, because your main objective involves having the lair open. If you're closing the lair, you're going to need another change form to go back. And until you find that other change form, you're going to have to either bounce between these spots, which likely aren't going to be open, and bouncing between the palace, which in the late game, you want actions that draw cards out of your hand. And if you're going to the palace, you're not playing a card. You're not discarding any cards. And so really you want to keep the lair open in the mid to late game.
Absolutely. I agree with you 100%.
Your opponent may force the lair closed with Grimsby, and then you have to find change form and deal with it yourself. And in that time, you can use that time to react to your opponent. in this manner. But yeah, I personally believe that change form shouldn't be played unless it's reactionary. Aside from the early game scenario.
Yeah.
That's something that I thought up a while back too, and I'm like, wow, that could be really powerful.
Because that's the thing I had to learn about change form is like, I absolutely agree with like late mid game and late game in general, change form is not very useful. But in the early game, you're absolutely right. That extra fate pressure, the ability to gain the extra money, and then even if you're not using any of the move actions, like the fact that you're just gaining money and putting extra fate pressure on your opponent is still really strong. Like for most other villains, like Ariel, I keep saying Ariel. Ariel's the real enemy of this deck. But literally all of Ursula's cards are reactionary, which is not something a lot of the other villains really have. They have some of them have like very small minor reactionary stuff or very passive style effects. Basically, Ursula's whole thing is reactionary, and even if she's going to apply that extra fate pressure, she's not going to hurt herself from doing that. Because if you still need to, you can just go back and forth between these two spots, and all that good stuff. So you're gonna have a good time. I definitely do agree though that in the late game, this spot doesn't have as much use because, especially if you're still digging for this stuff, playing cards is just as important as discarding. So the fact that you're not going to be able to do any of that, you really want to make sure if you're going to keep this open, whatever, in the later half or latter half of the game, you need to make sure you're getting use out of all these actions for sure. Definitely need to make sure.
And one thing I see a lot of new players do often is they will do just that, is they'll unlock the palace early and just jump between the ship and the palace, literally fate every single turn.
Nope, don't
play
do
and
that.
Discard, fate, play and discard, fate. And not only is that kind of fate spamming and not a sportsman-like way to play the game of fading every turn, but you're just not making enough progress by doing that. By only being able to play and discard every other turn.
You're only playing one card every other turn.
Yep, you're only playing one every other turn. It's slowing you down. Now, granted, I've seen them do it where they just rack up power, and that's when you get into the Prince John territory. They're just
she's making Prince
not
John
really
look sad.
Yep, making Prince John look sad. And then all it takes is just, he takes a few turns to play the Trident, play a contract, play the lair. And Ursula is also one of those characters where if you get overly faded, I know you mentioned this earlier, Jonesy, if you get over faded, you get to the point where not much can be done to actually stop her or slow her
Correct.
down. So I see people that will do that, and they'll fate really heavily and just try to stack at the shore and just fate all the time and play and make progress. But that still is not only just really overly fate aggressive, but you're not going to be making progress that fast. And there are some characters who can still just outpace you doing that. There are some characters that even if you're being fated really aggressively can still progress towards their goal and become inevitable. So as much as Ursula is so tempting to do that, we talked about it with Grow Giant earlier too. If you are fading aggressively, whether it's at the palace and ship or with Grow Giant, you're slowing yourself down in the progress. So like any villain, especially with Ursula, because it's so tempting that you have the ability to fate a lot, understand the right times to fate, but more importantly, the right times not to fate, so that you can actually progress towards your goal. And that's where I feel like people don't have fun with Ursula, is I feel like, well, I don't know what else to do, so I'm just going to fate aggressively and just fate spam until I find what I need to do. Make the game last an hour long as I'm looking for my stuff that I can't find, since I'm only playing and discarding every other turn. And I feel terrible because I drowned out my opponent, and it took forever for me to find my stuff, so I just didn't enjoy her. I didn't have fun playing her. Well, maybe that's because that's not how she was meant to be played.
Yes,
just like any other villain, you got to make progress. You got to do what you got to do, even though it gives you the option to fate really aggressively. Don't do that. Actually play the game, please.
And I also want to mention with that same game plan, if you're bouncing between the palace and the ship and you have the shore with a hero on it, you're making half as much searching progress as you would if you had the ship stacked and you were bouncing between the ship and the shore. Now,
yeah, that's a good point.
As well, since the palace has no action that draws cards out of your hand, if you're bouncing between these to make progress, why not have the lair open so that you can go here for some versatility and playing a card? even then, you could play Grow Giant to discard and continue searching through your deck while you're still activating things. So
it's super big. No, I think that's important because literally when you go to the palace, the hand that you currently have is the same hand that you're going to have on your next turn. So if you're still looking for stuff, it's very important to make sure that you give yourself the ability to still dig and find things. Which I think is a great point that both of you covered very well. Because you're absolutely right, Zach. Just I think I've always told the story. I will not tell who I played against. It was prep before the tournament, the initial tournament that we had in June, and someone was trying to see if they can create the Ursula Fate Monster machine, and they were definitely playing that way. And I was playing Scar, and as we all know, Scar is not fun to deal with when it comes to that stuff. But if my Scar can win against a Fate spamming Ursula, it's not a good strategy. So don't do it. It's not effective. You're not gonna make a lot of progress, and you're gonna make yourself sad.
When you're in this situation where you have like 18 power or something stupid like that, all you're doing is fading. You have enough power. Power doesn't help you. You're not moving anything.
Play the cards.
You're literally fading and doing nothing else, and that's like the definition of over-aggressive fading. Is if you're giving up your own progress to fade your opponent, especially if you've already faded them a lot and they're already behind. Yeah. Like that's when it becomes unnecessary and over-aggressive fading. That's not okay. That is that situation for Ursula. If you have plenty of power, you don't need to fade, and you're still fading.
Yeah.
What are you doing? Stop wasting time.
If you
Stop
have close to 10
the
power, you don't need the palace anymore. You don't.
Yes.
You really don't. That's usually when I'm like, okay, I need to switch back because that's more than enough power.
Yep.
All
so
right.
Keep that in mind.
Yeah,
that's a new mistake I see people make. Don't do that. Don't play Fate Spam. Don't do that. She can do it. It's not how she's meant to be played.
All right. I think we're gonna quickly go over the heroes because and stuff because honestly, fading Ursula is pretty straightforward on like what you can do. We'll talk about a few tricks, but we'll also kind of talk about kind of why these characters suck because they all do. They all suck because they are all horrible when you're playing as Ursula and they make you have a sad day. We're gonna leave you for last because no one likes you. So we'll start with Max. I actually really like Max. So kind of what we talked about earlier with like the whole concept of return to form. Max kind of makes it so let's say Ursula really needs to go to the shore. You play Max, and if you play Max to Ursula's location, you can move Ursula to the shore, slow her down a little bit. So not only are you basically forcing her to have to take an additional turn to get what she needs, you're putting her in a weird spot where she now has to make a different decision. Usually you have to recognize when Ursula wants to do that type of stuff because your opponent may actually want to go to Ursula's lair and do something there instead in that particular situation. But I really like using Max most of the time, especially if you're going to see that they might try to fate you next turn. You can basically lock them out of fate. So if they're like here, bam, move them over. Can't fade unless they got Grow Giant.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Great.
Especially if you're getting close to win condition yourself. If you notice, oh, if I get faded, I might have a chance of being pushed back. You play Max, you push her to the ship. She needs 1 in 3 cards to basically the Grow Giants to get it working. Also, I've got the stream up in a separate window, and it went down on my end. I'm not sure.
No, we're still live.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, we're still live. We're good.
Might have just paused.
Yeah, mine just paused. We're good though.
Okay. Cool.
No worries. It happens sometimes. Welcome to streaming.
Same with like when the palace is unlocked. If your opponent is say at the shore and they're gearing up to move a hero that may have just been placed at the palace, playing Max and moving him to their Ursula to the palace locks your ability to move and fate. So they have to take an extra turn if they want to fate to go here and fate and have to deal with your pressure of the heroes the next turn. You have an opportunity to fate again and put another hero at the palace. And now they can't fate you their next turn.
Exactly. That's definitely a big strategy, is similar to when you're fading Captain Hook. The double hero stack at the move hero location is pretty strong, where essentially it's just forcing of, hey, guess what? If you don't have any real reason to move a hero, besides just making it so you can fate, guess what? You can move one, but you're not doing anything else. So That makes the palace super, super rough in those circumstances. Because not only, and also it's actually pretty important to note too. Um, if you double stack here and they want to still move off, or even if there's only one, you're moving them over here where they're losing their ability to discard and play a second card, which is a big deal. So keep that in mind as well. That even just doing that will actually slow them down quite a bit if they want to do that. They'll have to make that decision how much they value the shore's top actions, which I think is incredibly important. Now,
Yeah.
let's talk about this guy. So Eric comes in clutch, very much so. So Empro, your little strategy that you like to do your little stacky stacks.
Where I stack people.
Yeah, you like to stack. Guess what? You like to stack all your people. I'm gonna play Eric, and when Eric is played, I get to move all these knuckleheads to any location I so desire.
Not everyone, but one.
Just one.
Oh, is it just one? Well, that's still enough. Because guess what? You got
Still
two.
enough.
You got two of them. Guess what? Boom. Done.
And now I'm locked out of, instead of 10 actions my next turn, I have only 6. Look at that.
Yeah, I know. Eric sucks. That's really the only thing that makes Eric super bad is he does help a little bit defense for the moving of contracts, maybe depending on how you might kill them. Like if you're going to use an eel or you're going to use Poor Unfortunate Souls to do adjacent moving. But other than that, like Eric is really trying to use to counter the hero stacking mechanic, where all you have to do is essentially play them and then move one of the other heroes to another location. Done.
I want to add too that if Ursula has set up a hero to vanquish, and you want that hero back in the rotation, you can play Eric here and move that hero and vanquish him for your opponent. And now, if you get return to form, you can slow your opponent down further.
Yeah, make that a tool in your arsenal so you can actually use that effect again.
Grimsby, if you want interaction and Grimsby has been contracted, say just for the Cauldron, you can use Eric to move Grimsby and vanquish him, and now you have more interaction against your opponent.
That's a very good point. Excellent observation, friend. Yeah, that is a very meta tactic right there if you want to do that. Because speaking of, I guess we can go ahead and cover it. Return to form essentially allows you to return any of the heroes except for King Triton from the discard pile, play them to Ursula's location. So the only gimmick is that unlike other ones, you have to play that particular hero to the location, which Ursula can work around a little bit, as we kind of pointed out earlier with the whole, you are at Ursula's lair, you play your key items, and if Ariel's in the discard, which we'll get to, return to form. But return to form's huge gimmick is the fact that since all the heroes are very reactionary, you basically can use their abilities once more again. So if you want to do something like what Emperor was showing off, using Eric to defeat a hero to get them back in the rotation, guess what? After Flounder already upset you once, he's going to upset you again. So, yeah. It's a scary card, and there's 3 of them. Not fun to work with. So, yeah. These suck. Speaking of Flounder, Flounder sucks. I'm just going to say that all these cards suck.
Honestly, Flounder is the MVP of Ursula's Fate deck while she's getting her engine going.
Yes.
I want to say that. There are 3 games throughout this league and the Prologue League where I was in the middle of searching for my items and Flounder shuffled the deck, and now I have to make all my progress again. I have lost games directly because of Flounder. I think 2 of them, after the reshuffle, the Trident goes all the way down to the bottom of the villain deck, and I am so upset. And just Flounder MVP, guys.
Flounder sucks. He's really bad. Now in the later game, he's not that great, but definitely in the early game, like Emperor was saying, when you're still trying to search for those items that you need, even if it's not the key items, when you're trying to like look for eels, maybe the Cauldron, maybe some contracts you want to use to defeat heroes, Flounder sucks. Also, he completely negates any opportunists that you have in hand. So if you have 1 or 2 opportunists and you plan on playing them next turn, Flounder comes out, he's like, nope. Get out of here. Get out of here. Flounder's one of the MVPs of this deck.
I have had a couple of situations where people have a choice of Flounder versus another Fate card, and they see that the deck is about to be reshuffled, and they're like, oh, the deck's about to be reshuffled. Well, if you do play Opportunist and you aren't discarding anything, like say you go to the shore and you play Opportunist, you're getting a card back in your hand. You're not reshuffling yet. So if you do have one or two Opportunists and you are about to reshuffle, Opportunist is your best friend. You can find literally any tool that you need. And as an opponent, you need to recognize that your opponent can do that, that Ursula can do that. So playing Flounder, even when the entire discard pile is about to be reshuffled into the deck, it's still a very strong play. You're reducing the amount of tools that your opponent can use.
Yep.
That Ursula
Always reshuffle. Flounder's ability does say you may shuffle if you're the fading player, but always do it.
Always do it.
Ursula will not be happy, but that is
She
what
won't
you
be
need to do as
happy.
fading player.
she's never happy when her
no,
discard
she's
pile
not.
is shuffled.
Let's talk about our friend Grimsby. So we've already kind of covered Grimsby quite a bit, but essentially Grimsby acts as essentially return to form, but as a hero. So when he gets played, you may, but with the May effect, obviously. So when he's played,
Change form.
yeah, change
Not
form.
return.
You basically can choose to move the lock token to the lair or keep it where it is. It's pretty good in situations where you might see King Triton or another key hero that needs to be defeated, like Ariel. And then you can use that to basically cancel out the defeat. You can use it to, let's say that one of the key items needs to be moved to Ursula's lair. You can do that. There are all sorts of shenanigans that you can do with the lock token. All sorts of cool stuff that you can do with it. So keep that aware when that needs to come out and be played. Usually Grimsby doesn't really take full effect until the later game, I usually have seen, but he still can be useful in the early game if you're trying to do the strategy of, let's say I'm Ursula, I'm going back and forth between Palace and the shore to Fate, gain extra money, play cards. Oh, Grimsby recognizes that. Boom. Done.
Another thing too, you can actually play him to the palace and lock the palace, and now you no longer have a move ally or item with Grow Giant.
That's
Or,
also true. You can
in
immediately
the other
do that.
situation, if you play him to the lair and lock the lair, you now have to deal with Grimsby when you get the lair unlocked.
Yeah.
You have yet another opponent to deal with when that happens.
Yeah, be aware of those situations. There's all sorts of cool stuff that Grimsby can do to make your life just poor and unfortunate, and you may not have a soul at the end of the day. Our good boy Under the Sea, Sebastian, over here is pretty straightforward. Basically, when he gets played, he steals a binding contract that's attached to any hero. The biggest counter with this is the fact that when Ariel or King Triton have a binding contract on them, you can play Sebastian and then steal it. The key thing to keep in mind with this, though, and this is the killer. Let's say we have this King Triton contract like this. I play Sebastian here. He steals it. And guess what? I now have to move Sebastian essentially twice to kill him because he has to be moved to Eric's ship for that to pop. So make your opponent's life absolutely miserable if you can with Sebastian. He's very much also a pain in the neck card. So try to look out for those circumstances where you can get full effect off of Sebastian. You're really only going to be able to get that full effect based off of the current locations that you have open, but definitely wherever he gets played, steal it and then grab the contract with it. One thing to keep in mind too, I think we might have pointed this out. If Sebastian, let's say, steals like a binding contract like this, and this gets locked, guess what? This binding contract is gone. You can't move Sebastian away. You can't get access to that binding contract again until he's defeated by unlocking this and then finding a way to move it and all that fun stuff. So that becomes nightmare fuel in the greatest forms with Sebastian.
Mm-hmm.
I hate the crab. Scuttle. And this will actually cover the other two items. Scuttle essentially is, hey, when I get played, I'm going to take the only two attachable items in the Fate deck, which are a Snarfblat or a Dingle Hopper. So Snarfblat makes it so to play a binding contract, it costs 3 more. Pretty straightforward. So if you play that on King Triton or Ariel when you need to kill him, It's great. Makes it super expensive. And yes, you can stack these. There are 2 copies of each one of these. So in theory, yes, you can make it. So it costs 9 power to play a contract on a King Triton. It sucks. But Scuttle basically steals one of those items from the discard pile. And keep in mind, too, that if you draw something like this as your start, you can play Scuttle. And since this technically gets discarded, since you're not choosing it, you can play it on a Scuttle right afterwards. Now, I wouldn't necessarily do the Snarfblat with Scuttle. I actually would probably do the Dinglehopper instead. The Dinglehopper, essentially, when you attach it to the hero, when Ursula would move to this location on her turn, she loses a power. This is great for when you're seeing Ursula try to hoard power at a particular location to basically reduce the amount of power she has by 1. So this is really solid as well. I actually prefer this over the Snarfblat when I am fading Ursula, because when I see her trying to rack up power, I have to make her make choices on where she has to go, because she's always going to lose the power at all times. So this one's a pretty solid one.
I think this is actually the worst opening fate for Ursula. Like
Yeah.
Ariel, okay, you can work around. Like Trident, you can move him when you play the Trident. Grimsby, okay, if he unlocks your lair, you can use it. Sebastian early, Flounder early, doesn't matter. Max early, oh well. Eric early, can't move anybody. But Scuttle early with a Dinglehopper means not only is your action economy blocked, but also the early power that you need is sucked out of you.
Yep.
You gotta fork it over because of the Dinglehopper.
Fork.
Unintended.
Yeah,
But
pun intended.
yeah, that I had this happen in a game the other day as an opening fate. Before I could even play a turn, I had Scuttle with a Dinglehopper out, and it's not fun.
No.
I also want to mention too that most of the times, if you find like another hero and a Dinglehopper, you're going to play the hero. You're not going to play the Dinglehopper. And even later in the game, while there are other heroes in the discard and you find like Return to Form and Dinglehopper, it's going to be much more valuable as the opponent to bring a hero out than playing Dinglehopper. So having a hero that plays the Dinglehopper for free with that hero just make it so much better, honestly. Already getting that passive loss of power on the board without having to sacrifice a play hero action.
Exactly.
Basically.
And even on top of that, I know that obviously Dinglehopper, the better card. But even like an early Snarfblat, like sure it sucks, but you have to think about, are they really going to spend that much power to take out Scuttle in the early game? You got to think about that. That's something else
Scuttle
to keep in mind too.
Obstacle for Ursula.
Exactly.
You kind of force an early hero stack in that case.
Yeah, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but you're basically already like, because like I said, I personally like to vanquish early when I can with Ursula in the beginning of the game. That almost makes it so I already don't want to deal with Scuttle at all, and you have to force the hero stack, and your action economy goes from 12 to 10 immediately.
Also, I do want to mention that with this stacking option, as the opponent, if you recognize that your opponent, that Ursula has gone to a location with 4 actions, your next fate action can cover their next play action. And while they can go here and move a hero, the next hero can go over here. And now they have to continue dealing with things as they're going on. And say that they do end up stacked, they go here to Eric's ship, and Eric comes out, oops, you have no actions.
Oopsie doodle. No fun for you.
Oh.
So, yeah, just more things to keep in mind. And with a permanent obstacle on the board of Scuttle and Snarfblat, you're already enabling that kind of fate action that you can do.
Right.
That you can start.
It's pretty rough.
Limiting your opponent.
So, we got 2 more cards to cover. King Triton's pretty straightforward. King Triton inherently does not have any like on play effect, but his main thing is the fact that in order to defeat him, it costs an additional power to play an effect that targets him, as well as playing a binding contract on him costs an additional 1. So by default, binding contracts will cost 3. Any effect played on him will cost 1 additional power. Having said that, though, keep in mind that the activations with the eels, as well as the move hero action, even if it's taken by Grow Giant, will not affect the cost of that card. So since Grow Giant is taking the action, it does not affect how much it costs. But since Whirlpool does target him, then yes, that one is more expensive. So keep that in mind when doing all that math. The goal with King Triton is to try to make it as cheap as possible to kill him, or make sure you have enough power to defeat him, because regardless, he is going to be a little bit more expensive to take down. Same thing with Poor Unfortunate Souls as well. If you do target King Triton as part of the effect, because remember, it is a May, you don't have to target him. It will cost 3 instead of 2. So keep that in mind as well. But he's really there for just to attach the Trident to and defeat and try to progress towards the goal. So be warned.
And I will say, if you do attach a Snarfblat to King Trident, before the Trident comes out, remember that anytime a hero is found, Trident says find a hero, discard all items on him and play him. Even if it's played to the
Basically,
same
they are
location.
taken off the board and brought back to the board.
Exactly.
Yep.
So anything else attached.
So you're fading Ursula. Make sure you save the Snarfblats for after he has the Trident. Otherwise, it's a wasted fade.
Exactly. Now, we saved the best for last. The best for last, I'm going to go grab Akuna Matata. No, I'm joking. I'm going to grab Akuna Matata. No. Ariel. I think
Yeah,
we
we'll
all
just
can
make
agree.
Ursula's fate deck Hakuna Matata and
She
return to form. That would be fun.
sucks. She sucks. She's probably the most devastating hero overall in the game. Or at least close, if not the worst. So if you don't know what she does, this is actually great because depending on what version of the game you may own in the flesh, this is a little worded differently in the early versions, but we'll clarify for those of you who may own an earlier version. Ariel, essentially, what happens is when she is played, you may take an item that is in her realm, or in Ursula's realm, and then move it to Ariel's location. So if I have one
That
of the
is
key
not
items...
attached.
Yeah.
A
So
binding
that is
contract
true.
will not move to her position.
So if you say you got a Trident or the Crown at Ursula's lair, you would then Ariel can then move it to her location, immediately forcing you to have to move the item back. On top of that, Ariel also has a passive effect that basically cancels your ability to use this move action. So you cannot move items or allies. So the move action in itself is gone. So the only way in this case for the Trident to be able to be moved back to Ursula's lair is if Ariel is defeated. So you will have to work around this card. This is what makes this card nervous for everyone, because Ariel will immediately just stop Ursula's ability to win the game. Now, it's not all doom and gloom, as much as I'm making it sound. There are definitely ways around it. We've already talked a little bit about hey, she comes out early. You might want to go ahead and get rid of her because she is going to limit what you're able to do. On top of that, if she is going to be brought back out to return to form, you may feel that coming. Move to Ursula's lair. Do the whole thing of play Crown. Trident's already there. So if return to form comes out, Ariel gets played here. You have to keep in mind it gets played to her location. You can't just move the item anywhere. It has to be to Ariel's location it gets moved to. So you can lock it up that way. The worst case scenario that really can happen is that for some reason Ariel does this. You defeat Ariel. This somehow gets locked because of Grimsby. So let's pretend Grimsby comes out. You weren't able to move it all the way back. And then Ariel gets played again, wherever she is. And then let's say it gets played at the palace. So sweet googly moogly. She's not fun to deal with. She is very damaging. Really the key thing I can say personally with Ariel is you need to be ready for her. That means have the Crown out, activate. When Ariel is out, make sure you got the tools to take care of her immediately, so that way you can immediately start, using Grow Giant to take the move action here, use the move action here to kind of get that moving again, stuff like that. You want to try to make sure you're ready to take care of her, because while I do agree, you're definitely towards the end of the game, you're going to be a little bit more passive towards the heroes, so you're going to stack these guys. But, as we kind of alluded to earlier, if you're stacking, you'll need to be aware that once Ariel's gone, you are still limited, or when Ariel's out, you are limited to what actions you have on the board. And you need to play a card to put a card on her.
Too.
Yeah. And then you won't be able to use that move action to even do stuff like with your eels. Let's say you only have one eel out on the board and he's right here. You can't move the eel to the shore to take out Ariel. So you got to make sure you have the tools ready to go to take her out when she comes out, because the longer she stays out, the slower your game is going to become. especially if you're already doing some hero stacking stuff. Not to say that's a bad thing, but you just need to be ready to do it. Because the longer she's out, your game is going to become a little bit of a miserable time.
Yep. Knowing when to play your items is so important. I see sometimes people will be like, oh, okay, I have a couple power. I'm going to go to the shore. I have enough power to play the crown. I'm just going to put it out now. The Trident, if it's played, can't be stolen until King Trident is defeated. Again, Ariel will only steal unattached items. So if the Trident is on King Trident, only thing she can steal is the crown or the cauldron. Obviously, the cauldron is just nobody cares if she steals it. She can have fun with the cauldron all day. But if you have the crown in your hand, don't play it if you know Ariel's still coming.
Yeah,
Best thing to
especially if you
do is
think
if you
yeah.
can, go here, play it when you can activate Jetsam to kill King Trident, and then you can even not activate it if you've activated Jetsam.
Well,
But if
you
Ariel's in the
activate
discard
Jetsam-
pile,
if you activate Jetsam and you kill King Triton, you still have a play card action, so you can actually play change form on that turn.
true. Well, not if you've played the crown that turn, but yes, if you have the crown already there,
Yeah.
That's true.
then
Yeah.
you could either
There's lots of little
play
tricks you can do with
Whirlpool to
that.
kill Trident and activate the crown, or activate Jetsam, play change form. And again, if Ariel's in the discard pile, waiting to come back from return to form, if you wait to play the crown until it's in the lair, you're safe and you win.
Mhm.
So working around her, so she's one card in 15. If she's still on your deck, she's more concerning. If she's in your discard pile, it gives you a lot more flexibility to work around it with return to form.
Yeah.
Keep that in mind. Don't just put the crown out as soon as you have it. Understand you got to be situational. Know what's in your fate deck, what's coming to hurt you. The only time I would ever play it earlier is if I know I can activate it once I play it, or
Right.
at least next turn if I know I'm not going to be fated. If you can use the crown, it'll be helpful. Or again, if you can play the crown and lock it up with change form, that's just as good too. But don't just throw items out willy-nilly and be like, well, if she comes out, oh well, because you're just making your game a lot harder on yourself.
Yeah.
Be patient.
Patience is the key. You gotta be tactical with her, and definitely she's one where when Ariel's still somewhere, you need to know how she can come back out, which means count how many return to forms are in the discard pile, count how many more cards are left in the fate deck in general. I mean, if Ariel's one of the last 4 cards in that fate deck, do not play the crown. Unless you can play it and then use it to basically like, all right, let me just check myself and see where she is. You know, that type of thing. You need to be aware of her at all times.
I want to also say that if you are in that situation and you activate the crown and you find that she is not in the top 2 of those 4 cards, you can leave those cards and let your opponent have a dead fate draw for your next turn. If you do find Ariel, you can discard her. If you ever find Ariel using the crown, I suggest always discarding her. Because if you're at the lair and you're activating it, the only way on the next fate for her to get back is return to form. If you're at the ship and you're activating the crown, then if Ariel comes about here, once you vanquish her, you're just 1 move action away. So it's really advantageous if Ariel is in your discard pile to be bouncing between these 2 spots.
Yeah.
But
so I do agree 100%. The whole, if she gets played to Eric's ship through return to form, that is not as bad to deal with. That is not that hard. Especially if you got to eel out, she's pretty easy to take down. 100%. Can you believe we've been at this for 2 hours?
It's nuts, dude.
I know.
I also want to add back to Ariel is that if you go into Ursula with the mindset of playing strictly around Ariel, you'll be playing a very reactive game. And you'll be waiting until Ariel comes out. And if your opponent isn't taking the initiative to fate you as liberally as you're planning for, they can just advance their win objective and put you in a lot tougher of a spot when you need to make more progress of your own and play these items and get them on board. But like if Ariel hasn't come out yet, you still have your move actions. You still have more versatility. So like if Ariel hasn't come out yet and you're playing around only dealing with Ariel on the board, you'd only want the binding contract green. But if you don't have her out on the board and you recognize that there are multiple paths, you can put a shore contract on King Triton and vanquish him another way. or you can have King Triton here, and you can put a ship contract on him and prepare to vanquish and move the Trident on that next turn. Like, if you're solely playing around Ariel, you're limiting yourself to one path to victory.
Exactly.
You're not, you're opening up the possibilities to other ways to win, which just about every other character has multiple avenues to win. So you don't want to be the person who sticks to just one path, and if this is in the way, it stops you. There are ways around Ariel.
And don't be afraid of Ariel. If you have to spend 2 power and a move action to kill her, it's not terrible. And there are ways around it. Like a more recent competitive game I played as Ursula, I was in this position where Ariel had stolen the crown, King Trident had the Trident out. I had the contract ready to kill him. And then Ariel came out, returned to form, steal the crown. I went here and played Whirlpool to move her, or Grow Giant to move her, and then a contract. And then next turn, I was able to play Whirlpool to kill Ariel, activate Jetsam to kill Trident, and then move the crown over. And just like that, you can kill 2 heroes in one location and get your items where they need to be. Spending a few extra power to move her, put a contract on her, being able to double vanquish at the lair if you can, super powerful.
I want to note that that's actually a lock too. You are locked into your win condition because you just vanquished Ariel. The only way to pull her back out would be through a reshuffle. And if you pull her out with return to form, she's guaranteed to go back to the lair.
Exactly.
So if your opponent is able to set that up while Ariel is out on the board, you're in trouble.
Yep. So she came out, and I was like, that's all right. It'll take me an extra turn or 2 to get rid of her. But can't be scared.
Exactly.
Progress what you need to do. Don't be too fast. Stay a little patient. But if you know she's coming, don't be afraid, but just prepare for her. Like you were talking about, Jonesy. Make sure you have a contract ready. Make sure you have the eels out.
Prepared.
Be prepared.
Wrong character,
for her
but
to
be
get
prepared.
No,
I think this was a great bit of time that we've spent on this character. I really do think I gotta really thank you, Zach and Empro, for coming in to help me out with this, because she is a different beast in itself. That really, this is not it took 3 people to talk about this character. It took 3 of us. I had to do all the heavy lifting. But no, honestly, because I think the biggest thing, because we've all kind of came in with different, experiences and different perspectives. And honestly, that could be said for any of these characters. But really, Ursula just has so many different tools, and the way that you have to play them out, it just makes it so interesting for her to figure out how to get around, all the different obstacles, how to find her particular cards. She's an interesting can of worms. But once you figure her out, and this is my bold statement of the day, everybody, Ursula's the most powerful in the game on paper. Now, in execution, different story. But she has the tools to get the job done and really make it so she's a threat. But finding the right time to play those cards, just kind of like how her fate cards are the same deal, that's kind of the real kicker. Making sure that you're playing the timing of the cards is incredibly effective, so that way you're getting the most use out of everything at the right times. But on paper, she's got the best tools in the entire game and the best ways to deal with everything kind of being thrown her way. So, any last words before we stop talking about the Sea Witch?
I want to add that I've learned a lot today, both from Jonesy's perspective and from Zach's perspective. And I want to also mention that even though I've played Ursula the most this league, I don't have a positive win rate with her right now. I'm still learning Ursula, and there are a lot of really great players out there that are learning how to deal with Ursula. So, take what we've said and apply them and mold your game plan so that you can get those wins. I'm here talking about the deep dive, but I still have a lot to learn myself. And so take that to heart. Just keep improving.
Empro, man, you're taking you're putting my teacher cap on. Come on, man. I'm the teacher here. You're teaching the teacher. I'm joking. No, that's some great words. I 100% agree with what you said. Seriously. Literally, everyone listen to Empro. Been preaching this for a while, but Empro's saying it for me, so I won't say it again. Zach, you have any
Absolutely.
last words?
That's a good way to close it. Is just remember that the deep dive is telling you to go play the character and making it easier for you to do so. I think I use this analogy on the Gothel deep dive, but I'll use it again.
Please.
Like riding a bike. You can't ride a bike if you don't get on the bike. You're not going to learn. You can watch a video. You can read a book on how to ride a bike. This is the video. This is the book. But the best way you're going to learn is by getting on the bike and riding it. So the manual, the instructions will make life a little bit easier when you do. And that is this deep dive. Because when you start playing her, it'll make your life a little bit easier and give you a head start. But the only way you're going to learn is by playing games with her.
Exactly.
So go out and do it.
Play the game. Please. Play this wonderful game.
Well, with that being said, you guys want to play some games as Ursula?
We're going to go ahead and end this deep dive, and we are going to go play a set or two. So, yeah. Ursula right here.